Picture this exact scenario. You leave your sprawling estate, your multi-million-dollar agricultural empire, and your entire intricate supply chain to go fight a grueling 10-year war overseas. You assume everything is fine. You assume your investments are safe, your market share is completely secure, and your executive team has the entire operation under control. But when you finally try to sail back home and resume your life, you realize a group of ruthless, opportunistic local elites have moved directly into your estate. They've taken over your prime real estate. They are systematically drinking your profits dry, burning through your capital, and trying to legally hijack your entire business empire while you are stuck in transit. Sounds like a wild, high-stakes corporate drama, right? Like something straight out of a modern Wall Street hostile takeover. But this isn't modern finance. This is the actual, literal plot of Homer's The Odyssey. For thousands of years, we've been sold the idea that this epic is just a magical fairy tale, a story about one-eyed cyclopes, enchanting witches, and angry sea gods throwing temper tantrums. But if you strip away the mythical fantasy and look at the actual, hard economics of the Bronze Age, the Odyssey wasn't a myth at all. It was the ancient world's most brutal, cutthroat turf war over land monopolies, trade routes, and generational wealth. Today, we're breaking down the commercial strategies of the ancient Mediterranean and why the real history is way wilder than the magic. To understand what's actually happening in this story, we have to completely reset how we look at ancient history, power, and wealth. In pop culture, when we hear the title King Odysseus, we immediately picture a guy wearing a flashy golden crown, sitting on a velvet throne, and casually ruling over some peasants. But in Mycenaean Greece, the actual historical period the story is built on, a king, known as a wanax, wasn't a medieval monarch at all. He was essentially the corporate CEO of a massive commercial syndicate. Odysseus didn't rule over empty rocks and daydreams. Ithaca was a centralized economic powerhouse. Let's talk about how they actually measured wealth. In the Bronze Age, true wealth wasn't measured in paper cash, because paper cash literally didn't exist yet. Instead, the ultimate flex was tangible, heavy-duty physical assets. This was an era of true quiet luxury and heritage aesthetics. The ultra-wealthy didn't wear branded logos. They wore heritage garments woven from the finest, undyed wools. They owned massive, sprawling groves of ancient olive trees that produced premium liquid gold for export. Wealth meant huge, climate-controlled underground vaults of stored vintage wine. It meant thousands of head of cattle grazing the hillsides, which was basically the ancient version of passive income and compounding interest. It meant stockpiles of raw bronze ingots, and most importantly, absolute, undisputed control over the local shipping lanes connecting the Ionian Sea to the rest of the world. Every single citizen, farmer, and craftsman on the island was tied into this economic network, and all of it fed upward into the central palace. So, when Odysseus packed his bags and loaded his ships for the Trojan War, he wasn't just leaving for a casual deployment. He was leaving a massive, highly profitable enterprise, entirely unattended. And in the ancient Mediterranean, an empty corporate chair with no active leadership isn't just a vulnerability. It is an open invitation for a hostile takeover. Which brings us directly to the villains of the story, the suitors. If you grew up reading the poem in high school, you probably picture them as a bunch of pathetic, lovesick princes awkwardly trying to flirt with Odysseus's wife, Penelope. You imagine them sending her flowers and writing terrible poetry while waiting for her to finally pick one of them. That is complete and utter fiction. Historically and legally speaking, those guys were ruthless asset strippers. They parked themselves inside Odysseus's palace, completely uninvited. and they absolutely refused to leave. They threw endless, lavish day and night feasts, systematically slaughtering his prized livestock, drinking his top-shelf vintage wine dry, and draining his cash flow day after day, month after month, for years on end. Why would they do this? Because under ancient Greek customary law, if a leader vanished or was presumed dead for a decade, a massive succession crisis kicked in. The local nobles weren't trying to win Penelope's heart out of pure, unadulterated romance. They were running a highly calculated commercial strategy. They were trying to force a corporate merger through marriage to legally lock down Odysseus's prime real estate, inherit his lucrative land patents, and completely absorb his market share. They were staging a violent, slow-motion takeover of Ithaca's local economy. By forcing Penelope's hand, the winner would gain control of the ultimate monopoly. They were burning through Odysseus's capital on purpose, hoping to bankrupt the estate so thoroughly that Penelope would be forced to capitulate. They were betting absolutely everything on the assumption that the CEO was never coming back. Of course, getting back home to stop this hostile takeover turned into the ultimate supply chain nightmare. Think about Odysseus's 10-year detour across the Mediterranean. Every single stop on his cursed journey represents a classic, devastating business hazard, just scaled up to mythic, cinematic proportions. Getting trapped in the cave by the Cyclops? That's exactly like wandering blind into a completely isolated, resource-restricted monopoly market with zero infrastructure and absolutely no viable exit routes. The giant eats your crew the exact same way a terrible investment eats your capital. Running into the island of the Lotus Eaters? That is the ultimate distraction trap. It represents getting completely derailed by a product so addictive and mind-numbing that your entire workforce loses focus, abandons their daily duties, and completely forgets their long-term strategic goals. And what about getting stalled out by the nymph Calypso on her island for 7 long years? That's the ancient equivalent of the ultimate golden handcuff trap. It's being financially or contractually comfortable enough in a lush, cushy environment that you completely lose your drive and momentum on your primary objective. Every monster, every violent storm, and every hypnotic siren wasn't just put into the story to look cool on a piece of parchment. They were terrifying personifications of the random economic variables, sudden market crashes, predatory scams, and catastrophic logistical disasters that can completely derail a massive venture over a decade of time. Which finally brings us to the climax of the entire epic, and honestly, the most incredibly satisfying part of the story. When Odysseus finally washes ashore in Ithaca, he doesn't just walk through the front doors waving hello to his staff. He comes back disguised as an absolute nobody. He quietly surveys the damage, analyzes the cooked books, identifies his enemies, and masterminds his final move. The famous scene where he locks the heavy doors of the Great Hall, strings his legendary bow, and deals with the suitors. Stripped of the beautiful poetry, that isn't just an action sequence. It is a violent, absolute, and uncompromising corporate restructuring. Odysseus was aggressively purging his company of bad actors. He was reclaiming his stolen market share and taking back his real estate monopoly by sheer force. He executed a flawless, zero-mercy liquidation of his rivals. He spent 10 grueling years fighting the elements and the odds, not just for the sake of ancient poetry, but to protect his generational wealth, defend his brand's legacy, and permanently wipe out the board members who tried to vote him out while he was gone. For anyone looking to dive deeper, this isn't just a cinematic retelling. It's supported by decades of classical research. Scholars like Sir Moses the Thirst Finlay, in his definitive work, The World of Odysseus, mapped out how the ancient world actually functioned through property control, trade networks, and estate management. The gods and monsters were how the poets explained the chaos. The power struggles and asset stripping were simply how the world worked. History hits completely different when you stop looking at the magical myths and start actually following the money. The ancient world wasn't built on magic. It was built on commercial strategy, leverage, tangible assets, and power. What other ancient stories or historical legends do you think were actually just massive, corporate turf wars in disguise? Let me know your absolute best theories down in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button if you love uncovering the hidden economics and commercial strategies behind history, and I'll see you in the next one.